So David, why did you decide to pick up pen, fingers, computers and write this book?
Well, in some ways, it goes right back to my initial interest in the history of art. One of the curious things is that amongst my ancestors, I have artists, and one was a person called David Pott, and he was mostly a history painter in Victorian era, and other of my forebears have been very good artists, but I can't paint or draw for the life of me. But I have, since I was a teenager, been really interested in the history of art and artists. And I remember my housemaster at my public school was an exceptional encourager in that. I can remember a bit of a defining moment where my interest sort of really took off, and that was going and seeing an exhibition in Edinburgh, the Scottish National Gallery, of Delacroix. And I think it's quite interesting, and that was the first artist, Eugène Delacroix, who really grabbed my attention. You know, high coloration and drama, stories, that kind of thing appealed to me, and personalities appealed to me a great deal. And so that's probably where it begins, just my constant interest as a sort of a major hobby during the course of my life. And then when we first visited Bishop Auckland, this was before we came to live here in 2016, so it was probably 2015, and I went to Auckland Castle and encountered these Zurbaran paintings. Again, it was a bit of a defining moment. You know, it's just like you go into that long dining room and you think, wow, these are extraordinary. They're kind of larger than life. They loom, and they are astonishing. So, you know, I think that the thing that again, when I then came back and started visiting a number of things, but one thing that really grabbed me was that it's like a room full of stories when you go into the long dining room at Auckland Castle. And stories have played a big part in my life. My wife, Pam, is a storyteller. And so you've got the story of Jacob's blessings, his sons, from Genesis 49. That's got, if you like, an initial story. And then there's a whole load of stories, if you like, associated with the 12 boys and the various things that happened to him. So you can sort of be reminded of those sorts of stories. And then there are sort of subtle allusions to Jesus and stories about Jesus that are hinted at in the paintings. And then you've got the extraordinary story of the paintings. You know, I can't think of a set of paintings which has almost like a more bizarre and adventurous sort of provenance than Jacob and his 12 sons. And then there's the extraordinary story of how these paintings kickstarted the regeneration in Bishop Auckland. So I was drawn to all these things. I thought, wow, it is amazing, all these stories. Then another thing that grabbed me was that one of the guides was talking about Jacob and his sons, and talking about the paintings as the boys, really affectionately, you know, always talking about the boys. Oh, I just love the boys, she says, you know, and I love that feeling that ordinary local people in Bishop Auckland have a sort of affection for them and call them the boys. And so when they went away, Auckland Castle, of course, closed for a while for renovations and to change the whole structure of it so that it would be like an exhibition about the bishops of Durham. And the paintings went on tour. They were shown in two places in the States, and then in fact in Tel Aviv in Israel. And you know, and this guide was saying, "Oh, the boys have gone. It's so sad. I can't wait for the boys to come back." So I love that sort of local feeling, and I was very keen to promote that. And oops, decline that call coming into me. I was very keen to promote the boys and get them better known by other people in Bishop Auckland, already quite well known, but just feeling it'd be great to get them better known. And my wife and I started something called Advent Windows. I think this will be a particular interest to teachers because basically what we have done in Bishop Auckland, we did it for 3 Christmases. It's not been able to happen since the pandemic, but basically we arranged something called Advent Windows, whereby schools mostly, but sometimes other organizations, link up with a local shop and they put on something between the 1st and the 24th of December. Each day a different shop opens a wonderful window that's been created by the pupils and others. And in 2018 we featured Jacob and his sons, and we kind of cast them as people in the nativity story, as kings and shepherds and others in the story. And we made some other models so that we had 24 models, 13 of them being the Zurbarans. And we set them up after they had been on display in the shops. We set them up as an alternative nativity scene in the Auckland Castle. Interestingly enough, we had a parade through the town. I'm just going to show you, you might be able to just see it. And we had this parade through the town, which was very moving. 250 people joined us, and we paraded the boys, these models of the boys. An artist called Laura Brenchley was fantastic. She went into the schools and taught them this sort of technique whereby the pupils cut out lots of magazine colors from different magazines and then pasted them onto the boards which she and her husband had cut, life-size boards of the 13 paintings. And in that way, we paraded them through the streets. And one thing that happened that really moved me was that after one of the windows had opened, it was St. Anne's School, and their character had been Simeon. And they then had a visit after the opening of the window in the High Street. And then they came to Auckland Castle to see the paintings. And as soon as we went into the long room, the painting was Simeon. Have we got that one, Carenza? Let's have a look at it. And so as we as the pupils came into the long dining room, and sort of on the opposite wall, there was Simeon, and a little boy shouted out, "There's my Simeon, there's our Simeon." And, you know, it was that sense that Simeon had been embraced and had been sort of understood as they had done all this creative work and made this this model of Simeon. And he's quite an interesting character in his hoodie, looks a bit threatening in his woolly coat and his hoodie and his stick, which you wonder what he's going to do with it. But yeah, so that was another thing that attracted me. It's led to the writing of the book, and I think that what happened was that I realized through all these things on Advent Windows that the boys sort of seemed to be alive, even though you know that they lived so long ago, etc., and they're there in the paintings. And I had this whole idea of a conversation. And of course, because people talked about the boys, I thought of this title, Listening to the Boys, and to create a book where which could be a bit different, could be more interactive. Yes, I would give some ideas and some thoughts, say a little bit about each painting, but I would create a book so that as well as the painting, you would have a blank page here so that you can write your own reflections. You can go and you look at the painting, you kind of behold it, you look at it intently, and you begin to imagine a conversation. You think, what's this person saying to me? Maybe you can ask the painting questions, etc. So it was a different approach. And I thought, yeah, maybe an art book with a different angle might be a good idea. So I think that summarizes the reasons why I wrote the book.
Thanks, David. There's multiple reasons in that little summary. And the book is, for people who haven't seen the book, it's actually tiny. but there's loads in it. And I would recommend it to you. I'll say more about the book at the end, perhaps, but it's certainly a really interesting read. It might be quite nice, David, given the audience that we have with us, if people are particularly attached to Zurbaran, if they'd like to just put into the chat why they are actually attached to him, because I had no idea about him at all until I moved to the region and started to discover the actual Auckland Castle collection. But he is internationally a well-beloved figure. So if people want to chuck in the chat what their connection with Zurbaran is, I think David might find that as interesting as we might find some of his comments about what's going on today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
David, which of the paintings are you most fond of?
I think the one that I am most fond of is probably Zebulon. So shall we have a look at Zebulon? This question was coming up much later, so it's probably not in your sequence now, because you're going to ask that as the third one.
No, that's okay. You just keep talking about Zebulon while I find it, because I'm queued up for a different one. You carry on.
So yeah, so you're probably queued up for, yeah, because I was going to answer question number 2 first and then 3 and 4. Anyway, yeah, so Zebulon, he's a really I think a stunning painting, but quite red is the dominant color, and the thing that, if I'm just going to look for the painting myself here.
Can we describe it in a bit of detail, just a general sweep of what you can see, apart from just the colors, so that Lisa and anybody else who can't perceive the picture particularly well on the screen gets a sense of what's on there? So
he's standing, as all these paintings tend to, a very solid figure in the background there of big sky, and the sea is behind him, and a red jerkin and a scarf type belt, and he's holding an anchor in his right hand and a long pole in his left hand, and he has got the most wonderful trendy colorful crop trousers that you could imagine being very acceptable on any sunny beach. I often think it would be a great idea for somebody to come to Bishop Auckland and set up a shop which could sell all sorts of the fascinating items, costume items, as well, like souvenirs for people. The Zurburan shop I think could be a great idea. So if anybody's got somebody who's entrepreneurial and wants to take that up, do pass that idea on to them. But and in this painting, Zurbaran has painted Zebulon. He's got a good bushy beard and curly black hair and a red cap on. So red is probably the dominant color. Probably the main reason why I like this painting so much is that actually Zebulon is very like my brother Jonathan, who is, he was 7 years younger than me. And actually he died sadly last year. He died of cancer last year. And he was a very keen bird watcher, very keen naturalist of all kinds, particularly bird watcher. He, for those of you in the UK, the RSPB, the Royal Society of Protection of Birds, and he led many tours and everything of bird watching in the Spey Valley and in Inverness. And I can sort of, as I look at the painting of Zebulon, I'm reminded of my brother perhaps looking in the distance and peering, because that's what Zebulon seems to be doing. He's got like sort of far-sighted, and maybe, and sometimes Johnny would of course be lifting up his binoculars as well. So yeah, there's a very personal reason why I like that. But as I say, I also just like the way that he is dressed, the very trendy crop shorts, and I also like that sense. I think that he would be a lovely person to talk to. He feels very solid, he feels reliable, he feels loyal. And in fact, the interesting thing is that there are references in the Bible later to the tribe of Zebulun as being marked by loyalty. So so there you go. Those are reasons for liking Zurburan.
A very affectionate set of reasons for associating with that particular painting. So if we go back to the beginning, I've got a little comment in the chat from Catherine, actually, which we'll come back to in a minute. Is there anything about the works that you think people should know about particularly? I mean, I think we do have some actual Zebulon scholars in the room and people who are going to be studying Zebulon soon. So there are other people in the room who've got a lot of academic interest and input in this.
Yeah, yeah.
But from an affectionate local person's perspective, what do you think we should be aware of in relation to these paintings?
Well, obviously, first of all, I mean, the subject matter of connected with Genesis chapter 49 in the Bible. It's, if you like, it's an illustration, particularly of that chapter, and the interesting thing about that chapter is that it's often in many translations of the Bible headed, Jacob blesses his sons. If you actually read the very first verse of that chapter, it says, Jacob called for his sons and he said, gather round so that I can tell you what will happen to you in days to come. Interestingly enough, people have said that the paintings do feel a bit like a gathering because they're all surrounding the long dining room, sort of around Jacob. And so he said, gather round and I'm going to tell you what will happen to you in days to come. And that is actually what these, what then comes in the rest of the chapter is not actually so often blessings. It is more kind of like foretelling the destiny either of the particular individual or more probably the tribe itself, what is likely to be happening, what kind of, so they're prophetic in nature, what Jacob has to say. At the very end of the chapter, it says, after you have all of these statements from Jacob, it says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, giving each the blessing appropriate to them. But here, for example, is the blessing to Simeon and Levi. This is the blessing. It says, their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly, for they've killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. Can you imagine Simeon and Levi receiving that blessing? No, that was not a blessing. I can imagine them going away rather disgruntled. And actually, several of the others are also either a little bit difficult or ambivalent. They don't feel like blessing. There's only one that has the word blessing in it, and then it just goes crazy because with Joseph, it keeps on talking about blessings, and it says, because of the Almighty who blesses you, blessings of the skies above, blessings of the deep springs below, blessings of the breast and the womb, your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains. And he's the only one who actually gets the word blessings. But yeah, so I think an understanding with the paintings that they are kind of prophetic. Then there's this whole significance connected with the number 12. Because you've got the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is the sort of foundational for Judaism, the whole concept of the 12 tribes of Israel. And then, of course, that is like a prototype of the 12 disciples as well. And that thought may well have been both in Zurbaran's mind, and it was certainly in the mind of Bishop Trevor when he bought the paintings. And because he also had 12 paintings of the 12 apostles. And so, incidentally, the subject of Jacob and the blessings is not a frequent one in art, but one person commented that where other artists have painted Jacob and his 12 sons, they're often, the sons look very similar. He said their mothers would not have been able to tell them apart in a lot of the paintings, but of course, here you have them so clearly different, very, very unique, each of them. And in fact, in Spanish art, Old Testament subjects are not very frequent. And some say, well, maybe that's because of anti-Semitism in Spain during the 17th century, and that may be a factor. But the interesting thing that everybody needs to know about these paintings is that the topic of Jacob and his 12 sons, particularly the 12 sons, was very popular in South America. And this was because it was thought that the Native Americans in South America were descended from the lost tribes of Israel. And there's a lot of writing about that. And so the Spanish missionaries would talk to the indigenous peoples of Central and South America and say, almost like as an incentive to get baptized, etc. You are descended from these tribes of Israel. You are important. They're kind of giving them, in a sense, extra dignity in this way. And so Zurbaran got these commissions for a series of paintings. And we know that 2 of these series went to America because they're still there. There's a set in Mexico and there's a set in Lima in Peru. And so the topic became really important sort of culturally. And they even had parades, rather like we had a parade of the models that we made for Advent windows. There were parades with their sort of like these the giant parades with the 12 sons in Lima. There are accounts of those parades. A bit like in Spain, obviously you have these other festivities like the 3 Kings and these parades. In South America, it was the 12 boys. So yes, all these are very sort of, it's very interesting to understand that whole South American connection. Incidentally, some of the costumes, like Zebulun's wonderful shorts, might have come from South America, or the materials. And actually, just a little sideline, and that's interesting to know, is that Zurbaran's father was a haberdasher, and so it's quite likely that this was a means of advertising his father's shop and his wares. But yeah, so going back to South America, you have the thought that perhaps these were commissioned by somebody for South America. Maybe they were going to go to South America, and there are any number of theories as to what happened. Some say, well, perhaps someone else thought these paintings are magnificent, I want them here, and in a sense, paid the money, and so they never got across to South America. There are others who put forward an idea, and it sounds very fanciful, but it's not entirely, I think it's not entirely incredible, but that the paintings did go towards South America, but maybe they were intercepted by the Jewish pirates, because quite a lot of the Jews, who'd had a very rough time in Spain and Portugal, emigrated to the Caribbean, and a number of them became pirates, and they were very much on the side of the British, and they wanted to capture or raid anything Spanish, any Spanish ships that they could grab hold of, because obviously they were their sort of enemies. And so somebody put forward this idea that perhaps the paintings were captured by the Jewish pirates and then handed over to the British, who sailed them to the UK. It's a lovely story. Why not? But yeah, it is just a story, but you just never know. Sometimes truth is stranger than even fiction. And but in the end, we know that they were in the possession of a person called Mendes, and a Jew in London. This is in the sort of 18th century, early 18th century, and then he died. And so his estate, which included these paintings, came up for sale. And that is the point at which Bishop Richard Trevor, the Bishop of Durham, that he bought these paintings. So this, we're talking now at 1753-4. And Bishop Richard Trevor is known to have been a strong supporter of the Jewish naturalization bill. And this is a really interesting thing that in terms of the stories, because the Jewish naturalization bill was designed to try to give the Jews a lot more freedom and privileges, etc., in British society, and just sort of make their life much more normal. But there were absolute riots when this bill came forward. There were people saying that the Jews would turn St. Paul's Cathedral into a synagogue. They would insist that every male was going to be circumcised. There was absolute panic at this bill. So great was the panic and the rioting that they never passed this bill, never got through. And Bishop Trevor was really, obviously disappointed about that. And so, although we don't actually have, again, concrete proof of this, it does seem very likely that he bought these paintings as almost like an act of reconciliation, and perhaps an opportunity to talk about that with his guests around the table. So he created this whole environment for these paintings that he had bought. The long dining room is amazing. And when you think that this is many years, of course, before the National Gallery or something like that, some people say maybe this was an influence on the whole concept of galleries, the way that he displayed these paintings. So I think that those are some of the things. Perhaps one other thing I should mention, of course, is to understand the paintings and their significance is, again, to stress how amazing it was that Jonathan Ruffer bought these paintings in 2011. What had happened was that the church commissioners were recognizing that they really, they needed money from different sources, and they thought Auckland Castle and the Zurburan paintings, perhaps we don't really need them anymore. Can we sell? And so they came up for sale. And a number of people in Bishop Auckland and the area, including the then Bishop of Durham, were really concerned about this because, Bishop Auckland has had a tough time. And one of the few things, if you like, that made Bishop Auckland special was the Zurburan paintings at Auckland Castle. And so the thought that they were going to go and be sold, was pretty terrible. And Jonathan Ruffer heard about it, and he decided to buy. In fact, the Rothschild had put in a bid, but when they heard that Jonathan Ruffer wanted to buy them and keep them in Bishop Auckland, Rothschild said, "Okay, that's fine. Hands off. You can buy it." And so as a result of that, Jonathan Ruffer is very keen on Spanish art, and as many of you will know, there's also going to be a new Spanish art gallery open in Bishop Auckland, opening later this autumn, which is very exciting. I've got connections with Madrid. I think it'll be only the second sort of Spanish art gallery in the world outside of Spain itself. The others is the Meadows in Texas. So I just lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? Oh yes, I mean just the whole way in which what happened is that when he decided to buy them, if you like, the castle, it was gift wrapped in the castle, and he and his wife didn't quite know, what should we do with the castle? Shall we have what's it going to be, a wedding venue, or what can we do? It needs a lot of work doing on it. And gradually they just got this vision to really try to transform the whole of Bishop Auckland and make it an attractive visitor destination. So the whole idea of transforming the castle so that it be almost like a museum, keeping the Zurbarans there, but also very much highlighting the story, the remarkable story of the bishops of Durham. And then along came the whole idea of Kinnaran show, light show in the summertime, which people thought was utterly crazy in the Bishop Auckland, but it's kind of worked. And then other museums like the Mining Art Gallery and the Spanish Art Gallery, and then there's going to be the Faith Museum, which will also probably be opening next year. So all this, the amazing thing about these, that, you know, to think that just a group of paintings like this should kickstart all this regeneration in Bishop Auckland. So I think that's another thing which is pretty remarkable about the paintings that you should know about.
Thanks, David. It probably feels quite appropriate that the establishment of the foundations of the 12 tribes of Israel should be an inspiration for the establishment of the foundations of a regeneration in Bishop Auckland.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why not? And why not?
I know what, there's one or two other things that I wanted to mention. And I'll show you, we'll have a look at one or two of the other.
David,
yeah.
just before you do, I'd like to bring in a comment from Catherine and then a comment from Richard, if that's okay. I know nothing about this, and there are people in the room who know a lot more than I do, but Catherine, who doesn't have a mic, says or observes, I know Zurbaran from multiple works in Spain, especially the Prado Museum. These seem stylistically very different. So I'm just going to park that there for a moment. And then Richard, do you want to come in with your observation?
So the observation which I made in the chat was just, I was interested, David, in that you have left this blank page in front of every picture in your book so that people can actually react to them. And I was just sharing my own reaction, which I saw them together when they were on their US tour. And I was very fortunate. I strolled into the museum they were at, the Frick, and I was the only one in there for about an hour and a half with these paintings. It was early in the morning. It was, not a comment on the Frick's popularity, but what really struck me was the desire to have a conversation with them. They really called attention to themselves, to think about some of the details you've been talking about, the fabrics, there are things about them that just gave them a life.
Yes.
Really are, and it set me on a whole new direction in my own life, because it really rekindled a fascination that meant I gave up the career I've been following for the last 20 years and came back to academic work, and I'm coming up to Durham to start my PhD at the Zurburan Centre.
Oh, great.
Those paintings had this profound effect and change. And it is something about their vivacity. Even if you set apart the religious implications and the religious story, that causes you to want to think about them as individuals, begin to try and understand this silent conversation that's going on between them, that you're interposed in. And I think that that's something about their intrinsic greatness that's with all of these things to happen.
Well, I agree with you. And it kind of links with what Catherine was saying, because I think they are stylistically sort of rather dramatically different from a lot of Zurbaran's paintings. And that was, he was painting, you know, a lot of the time for monasteries. And so there are lots of paintings of saints. And those saints somehow often seem, you know, there's St. Francis, and there's many other saints that he painted, or other, you know, prominent religious figures of 17th century Spain, and they often seem a little bit disembodied. You know, as if the idea is to paint them as super spiritual, you know, eyes perhaps gazing up to heaven, and almost ghost-like. They're sort of floaty, spiritual, but not earthy, not substantial, and so this is very different. And I sort of, you can't tell, but you get the feeling, you think, this is Zurbaran. He's really kind of like freed up to do something here, different from his commissions, you know, which he has to sort of hack out perhaps to keep the money rolling in. I may have got this wrong, but you just sort of think, yes, that that this is the opportunity to display all sorts of other skills that he had as an artist. For example, he's a very good landscape artist, but obviously you don't get commissions often for landscapes, but the landscapes at the back there are delightful to actually in each painting to study.
I particularly like in the painting of Asher, the bread, which is
exactly,
a wonderful still life within this painting, and speaks to his abilities as a still life.
That's right. Interestingly enough, he had a son called Juan, and he was a very distinguished still life painter. And I wonder whether he had anything to do with the bread. But I mean, Zurbaran is a great still life artist as well. But yeah, Juan, sadly, he died aged 29 in 1649. So not that long after this set was completed. But so I do wonder sometimes whether Juan, contributed to some of the paintings, and especially the sort of still life aspects. I even wonder too whether Juan is one of the ones who's portrayed as the 12 sons. I'd love to be able to prove that somewhere. Perhaps it was Zebulun, Zurburan, kind of similar kind of Z's and N's and things. So yes, my little fantasy. But yeah, they are extraordinary in their lifelikeness, and the fact that they're so different. That there are nice ones and nasty ones, and there are ones in extraordinary elaborate costume, and there are ones who look rather scruffy. This extraordinary series of contrasts. And one of the lovely ways that I think the paintings cohere as well is that they have these themes of unity. Like each one has a block in the left-hand side which says the number of the sun, 1, 2, 3, 4 in Latin numerals, and each one has this huge skies in the background and the low landscapes which make the characters stand out more strongly, and each one has lighting coming in from the left. So there's all these things which give a sense of unity, and then there's all this extraordinary variety, some of which we've mentioned, and things like the extraordinary variety of postures. There's some looking behind, there are some sideways profiles, one or two at the front. It's extraordinary variety as well in that regard. Yeah.
I'm also intrigued by the 2 left feet, David, which I hadn't even noticed.
Yes, yeah, in Dan. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We've got something in the chat from Rosemary. Rosemary, do you want to just pitch straight in?
Okay, I've just got my video on. So I'm late to the meeting here. Hi. So David, I've just put in the chat, and I was reading a book. I finished reading it last night. Given that all of these paintings are painted in Seville, a land of sunshine, blue skies, it suddenly occurred to me last night, why do they all have cloudy backgrounds? Is it just artistic license, do you think? Or is Zurbaran trying to say clouds symbolize rain, rain is blessings?
Yeah, I think I thought about this cloudy skies, and I was thinking that cloudy skies maybe give more potential for variety in terms of painting. There are some which have got hints of blue, like Zebulun, but I think that he likes to paint those cloudy skies, and maybe the variety of cloud, or if you look at painting like Issachar, you see the contrast of this white and blue. There's both colors there, but I think that kind of variety and cloud as well perhaps also serves to highlight the character more strongly than if it was just blue. And certainly if it was blue in every painting, well, Zurbaran would get bored with that. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts on that. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Rosemary. My question is not really related to the landscapes. It's more relation to his conversation with Dura. I mean, several times in the little book, which is very helpful,
Yeah.
you bring in the comparison with how he's basically stolen framing or posture from one of the Dura paintings, which would have been, or etches, which would have been the most famous way that most people would have experienced the Bible visually at the period. So
Yeah.
he knows what he's doing
Yeah.
in his mimicry and in his presentation. I just wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that, and I think that actually a lot of artists do borrow, and sometimes we can work out and we can see, oh yes, they're borrowing from so and so, and other times perhaps we haven't discovered yet. But so I think it's perfectly normal for people to see something and then adapt it and refashion it. What I think is rather interesting about Dürer is, of course, that he is really an artist of the Reformation. And a lot of people have sort of questioned, was Zurbaran really a religious man or not? Was he a person of real faith or not? Some people think, oh, maybe he was just, if you like, a hack artist who was doing all this religious painting because it was financially rewarding. But I actually have got a suspicion that that Zurbaran may have been somewhat unorthodox in some of his beliefs, in relation to the Catholic hierarchy, etc. And so he may have kept his religious beliefs, some of them, pretty quiet, because those days were so dangerous. If you express things that were in the slightest bit heretical, then you could be in trouble with the Inquisition. Some people think that he may have been, with the boys, he may have painted some Jews there, some real Jews. And if so, did he keep that a bit quiet? And if he had sympathies with the Jews, he probably would have kept that pretty quiet. And he seems to be quite a serious student of the Bible. Again, would that have raised some suspicions in some of the Catholic hierarchies? I don't know, but yeah. So I've just got that idea that maybe he might be influenced by other things, somewhat by the Reformation. I don't know, but it's just a theory, if you like, that may have meant that he had to keep his religious opinions and ideas a little bit on the quiet. But I think it's unmistakable. I think he is saying something about inspiration in the famous painting of him with this is a painting of Christ on the cross, but with an artist. And many people think that the artist with his palette, that is sort of like a self-portrait of Zurbaran. And I think that is speaking of his inspiration. And then, of course, probably the most famous and iconic image of Zurbaran is the Agnus Dei, the Lamb there, and the Lamb of God. And you think, well, that seems to me to be the work of a person of very deep spirituality. I think that's sort of unavoidably extraordinary. It's so deep, it's profound, it's simple, but it really gets something across which has moved millions ever since it was first painted. So yes, I do think he was a person who was definitely coming from a perspective, a very strong perspective, which I think you could call Christian. Whether it's conventional Catholic, I'm just not sure. I think he could also been influenced quite a lot by the 6th century theologian Saint Isidore of Seville, because Saint Isidore of Seville said things about Asher and Asher and the symbol of bread. Of course, he holds in the painting, he has this bread basket, and that as a symbol of Jesus and of Christ as the bread of life. So I got a feeling that he could have got some of those ideas from Saint Isidore. Yeah.
Conversations within conversations. Richard, you've got a nice big fat list for your PhD. Whatever you wanted to do, I know what I want you to do. Not that I feel like a bully in this, but I'd be very interested to know what else is going on. We've only got a few minutes left, David. So what I would be interested in is your personal perspective on what you think is the most challenging of all the paintings, because it's been a bit of a fan club so far, and that's fine. Lots of people in the room are interested, but which one's most challenging and why?
Well, I think it's Levi, and
Shall I just share this painting? Okay.
Share the painting of Levi, and to me it has a sort of a sinister feel about it, this painting, and basically he stands tall like they all do. There he is, and he's in very fine clothes, pretty luxurious clothes, a dramatic headdress, and he's sort of looking over his left shoulder. So basically, it's a view from the back, but looking over his left shoulder, and the light's coming, as in all the paintings, from the left, and he's holding incense in his hands. And there's like an image of a temple in the background, and I think that to me, why it's sinister is that he seems to be kind of like looking down at us from a position of sort of arrogance and superiority, and the painting reminds me of spiritual power. And the way that spiritual power often brings with it temptations to abuse in different ways. And obviously that's something which is very current, if you like, and topical these days. And what is this a case of Zurbaran joining in with the, if you like, almost like the biblical theme of the critique of priestly power? When you think that many of the descendants of Levi get rather a bad press in the Bible, well, of course, Aaron slipped up with things like the golden calf, and then you've got Eli with his corrupt sons, Hophni and Phinehas. He doesn't do anything much about them, so yes, sort of corrupt priesthood. And then, of course, in the New Testament, you've got people like Caiaphas and the high priest, and Jesus being very, very critical of a lot of the religious people of his day, and of the way they like to dress in fine clothes and pray ostentatiously. And I think that all those sorts of themes are kind of summed up in Levi. So yeah, perhaps compare him with, he's the one person who has the same name, Levi, of course, of one of the disciples, who was otherwise called Matthew, and who was a tax collector. And perhaps because he was doing well as a tax collector, he might have had quite fine clothes. But I wonder if after 3 years on the road with Jesus, he probably looked a bit different.
Thank you. That's really interesting. There are so many different ways into these paintings, and your book is a little insight into that. What I would like to be able to do, if anyone would like to, from the Resource Centre's point of view, is if you fancy doing a Bible study group on the paintings using a book, we quite happily get a set for you so that you could actually sit around together and do it as a group. Just let me know if you want to do that. If there's going to be anybody who runs a clothes shop in Bishop Auckland, then I'm going to have to recommend my friend Chris, because he's my clothing expert and has been for many years. So Chris, I think we should just ask you to run that clothing shop when it comes to nice bright colours and good t-shirts. In relation to the rest of the stuff, David, thank you so much for all your time. There are lots of people in the chat who I'm sure will go away and have lots of other ideas when they leave you. You can go and view the paintings at the Auckland Castle collection when it's ready. I was hoping that we'd have Claudia with us so she could say more about that, but if we hear more information, we're very happy to email you any information about that if someone else doesn't know in the room already. I think it's really brave of anyone to share their passion And it's really nice that you've done that in print, David. The book gives us lots of different ways into the paintings, both from Hebrew scripture, Christian scripture, the art itself, and generally Zurbaran's world. So if you're interested in this, I really hope that you get a chance to both read the book and tell us more about it. And of course, those of you who are doing research, Richard, Domain, anybody else, or maybe even Kate, you're welcome to come back in a year or two and give us some more. And we'd absolutely love to be able to host another conversation. Janice, you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to say anything? Or
Oh, I was just going to say thank you very much. It's been so interesting.
there's loads in there, isn't there? I mean, by all means, feel free to unmute yourself and speak to David. Just beware that too many of you at once makes his hearing go bit bonkers. Right. Well, Mike Turner in the chat has said, thank you very much, which is lovely. Nice to see you, Mike. Heather's saying thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you very much. So we will look forward to seeing you at any other event that the Resource Centre is running. Anybody that would like to run an event for us or with me or have a conversation about their own area of work, you would be very, very welcome to. The Resources Centre is not just a collection of books. It's a network of very talented people, and we are concerned that everyone knows what a treasure and richness there is in the Northeast. So we feature Northeast people, and we occasionally go national, but we like our Northeast babies. So please do feel free to pitch in. Joanne, do you want to say anything?
No, I'm just going to echo what you said as a trustee of the Resources Centre, just to say that it's there for everyone and is run by not just Carenza, but a very talented group of people. And if you go in, they will warmly welcome you and find you whatever you need to be found. Trust me, they have many, many years of trying to find me whatever random thing I've asked for.
Yeah, I'm totally the least talented person on the team. You can take anyone's word for that. Rosemary?
Rosemary.
I was just going to say, if people haven't actually been to see the Zurburan, Auckland Castle was open on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays. And they're in the long dining room. And then the castle is closed from October the 3rd until next spring. So although if you go around the Spanish Art Gallery, which is open towards the end of October, you will be able to pay for a ticket to have a guided tour along to see the Zurbarans in the long dining room. So if you haven't got to Bishop to see them in person, then take your opportunity.
That's really helpful, Rosemary. Thank you so much for that. And what I'm trying to persuade David to be able to do with anybody at the castle that can enable is, I'd quite like David to take us on a little tour around. So if we get a chance to do that, and if anyone at the castle can manage that, that would be really nice. Heather?
Yep. See what we can do. Yeah. Great.
Heather, did you want to say something, sweetie?
No, well, just to say how much I've enjoyed the session, yeah, and I would love to go and see them sometime.
Great. Great.
Well, I hope you will. Right, everybody, nice to have seen you. Happy evening to everybody else. David, as always, Megadet. I'll see you when we start getting through our Finkel Camino resources and everything else that we're doing. In the meantime, look after yourselves, and I'm sure I'll see you all again. So do take care. Good night.